She raised her hand first. Solved the problem no one else could. But instead of praise, the teacher ripped her paper in half and said, "You people always think you're smarter than you are." The class laughed, but what she did next made them all go dead silent. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sky over Fairgrove, Virginia was unusually gray, as if the clouds themselves sensed the tension that was about to enter the halls of Willow Ridge High. The campus bustled like any other suburban school, teenagers lugging overstuffed backpacks, huddling in groups by lockers, eyes glued to phones, laughter echoing down fluorescent-lit hallways. It was the kind of place where traditions ran deep, and change moved slowly, if at all. Tiana Brooks stepped through the front doors with quiet purpose. 16 years old, tall for her age, with soft locks pulled back into a neat bun, and eyes that missed nothing. She clutched her schedule with one hand and the strap of her backpack with the other. Everything about her posture was careful, practiced, like someone used to shrinking just enough not to be seen, but not so much as to appear afraid. It was her first day. She had transferred from Kennedy Prep, a magnet school in the city, after her mother's job relocated them to this predominantly white town on the edge of rural Virginia. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Clean slate. But already, as she passed bulletin boards filled with cheerleading flyers and student council campaign posters, she felt the weight of a gaze she knew too well. Curiosity laced with quiet judgment. Her schedule read, Period 1, AP Calculus, Room 213. Mr. Wexler. As she approached the classroom, her fingers twitched slightly, betraying nerves. Not because of the subject. Math was her sanctuary. Numbers didn't lie. Equations didn't shift based on skin color. But classrooms, teachers, those had always been unpredictable. She opened the door gently. The room was already full. Every head turned. The laughter died instantly, not because she was late. She wasn't, but because she was unexpected. In this sea of white and beige faces, Tiana's brown skin and tightly wound locks stood out like ink on snow. At the front of the room stood Mr. Colin Wexler, a man whose salt and pepper hair matched the rigid lines of his face. He looked like someone who'd been teaching so long that change annoyed him more than bad grammar. In one hand, he held a dry erase marker. In the other, a clipboard with the class roster. His eyes scanned her from sneakers to forehead, then dropped to the paper. "Brooks? Tiana?" he asked, voice clipped and sharp like chalk against a board. She nodded once. He blinked slowly, then offered a flat, almost rehearsed smile. "Are you sure you're in the right room?" The question hit harder than it should have. A few students chuckled under their breath. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the sting. He gestured to an empty seat in the second row, right between two boys who didn't bother to slide their chairs to make room. She squeezed in without comment, unfolded her notebook, and opened to a blank page. Focus. That's what she told herself. Ignore the eyes. Ignore the whispers. Wexler turned to the board. "All right, let's begin. Review of limits and derivatives. Nothing too scary." As he worked through a sample problem, his lecture was peppered with those kinds of half-jokes teachers use to sound casual. But there was something off about his tone. "I don't expect brilliance on the first day," he said, eyes flicking briefly toward Tiana. "But hey, miracles happen." A few chuckles. She didn't flinch. Then came the moment he asked a question. A relatively complex derivative, meant to stump most students. The room went quiet. Tiana, without raising her hand, wrote the answer in her notebook, then hesitated. She raised her hand slowly. Wexler turned. "Yes, Miss Brooks. Was it?" The answer is -3 cosine x," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. Skeptical. Walked to the board. Redid the problem himself. The chalk froze mid-step. "That's correct," he admitted, almost surprised. Then louder, "Guess we've got ourselves a prodigy." The way he said it wasn't praise. It was a warning. From that moment, the mood shifted. During the next 40 minutes, Wexler's tone grew icier. When Tiana answered another question correctly, this time before anyone else even tried, he narrowed his eyes. "Well, let's not jump to conclusions about ability just yet," he said dryly. "Even a broken clock is right twice a day." Some students laughed harder this time, not because the joke was funny, but because they could. Tiana stayed silent, but the burn was starting to build. Not anger. Not yet. But that deep familiar ache of being both invisible and too visible at once. By the third question she kept her hand down, even though she knew the answer. Even though the solution screamed at her from the board. Wexler noticed. "Cat got your tongue, Miss Brooks?" She looked up, startled. "No, sir." "Good. Because in this class, we value participation. Even if math isn't traditionally your area." The pause after "your" was intentional. Tiana blinked, unsure if she'd heard it right. A few students snorted. One girl whispered something and laughed. He moved on without acknowledging it. By the end of the class, she had stopped taking notes. Not because she didn't understand, but because she did too well. The math was familiar, the hostility, even more so. The bell rang. Students packed their bags, but Wexler's voice cut through the shuffle. "One last thing," he said, looking directly at Tiana. "I know it's early in the semester, but I like to be honest with my students, so let's just say this. Your kind don't usually do well in this subject." The words hung in the air like static. Silence. Total. Even the ones who laughed earlier looked stunned. A few glanced at her, waiting to see what she'd do. Speak up? Cry? Leave? But Tiana just stared back at him, blank-faced, unreadable. Her fingers curled slightly around her notebook. But she said nothing. She didn't have to. Because in that moment, everyone felt it. This wasn't just going to be about math. This was going to be war. Wexler turns back to the board and writes the first quiz date, then glances back at Tiana, smiling smugly as if daring her to prove him wrong. The sting of Mr. Wexler's words lingered long after the class emptied. Tiana sat frozen at her desk, her hands resting atop her notebook, where the correct answers to every question he'd thrown at the class sat in clear, deliberate script. She knew this game. The rules never changed, no matter how precise, how brilliant, how prepared you were. Some people only saw what they chose to see. But before Willowridge, before Wexler, before the snickers and sideways glances, there had been numbers. Pure, perfect numbers. At 5 years old, Tiana had taken apart her mother's desktop calculator, not out of mischief, but fascination. She wanted to know what happened inside the machine that always knew the answers. By 6, she had memorized multiplication tables up to 20, and could mentally square 2-digit numbers. She didn't brag. She didn't even fully realize it was exceptional. It was just how her mind worked. Her mother, Alicia Brooks, noticed it first. A librarian at Jefferson Branch Library in Norfolk. Alicia had always raised Tiana on stories. Stories of black inventors, civil rights leaders, poets, astronauts. Every night was a new voice, a new legacy. But when she caught her daughter correcting a statistical error in a children's science book, at age 7, she switched gears. Bedtime turned into math time. She bought her daughter puzzle books, logic games, and used calculus textbooks from library sales. "Education is your armor," she'd tell her, gently brushing her hair at night. "They might try to strip everything else away from you, but they can't take what's in here." She'd tap Tiana's forehead. By middle school, teachers alternated between awe and doubt. Tiana corrected a geometry teacher once, politely, but publicly, and he never called on her again. She learned to offer answers in whispers, to downplay herself. Her notebooks were masterpieces of equations and annotations, but she always turned them in with a shrug. The smarter she became, the quieter she got. Now at Willowridge, that silence was a necessity. Over the next few days, Wexler's attitude didn't soften. It calcified. Each time Tiana raised her hand, he'd hesitate a moment too long before acknowledging her. When she answered correctly, his responses were laced with doubt disguised as humor. "Looks like someone had a good guess." Or "impressive for your first week." The class watched silently. Some students avoided her. Others stared at her like she was a glitch in the matrix, an anomaly. No one spoke to her after class. She walked the halls alone, but the numbers still made sense. In her room at night, she wrote equations to calm herself. Equations had never mocked her. Equations never flinched at her skin or called her intimidating for being right. Then came the quiz. On Friday morning, Wexler passed out a pop quiz, claiming it was standard procedure to gauge where the class stood. Tiana didn't flinch. As students groaned and shuffled papers, she had already solved the first question in her head. 10 questions, all derivatives and limit problems. Her pencil danced across the paper, deliberate and clean. 20 minutes in, she was done. Wexler raised an eyebrow when she handed it in first. Finished already, he said, holding her paper like it might be radioactive. Yes, sir. He nodded stiffly and tucked it under a stack of quizzes on his desk. No good job. No, we'll see how you did. Just that same cold wall. That weekend, she felt a quiet pride. It wasn't about the grade. It never had been. It was about knowing she could navigate the battlefield with nothing but her mind. She expected nothing but hoped for a small acknowledgement on Monday. What she got instead was silence. As students shuffled in, Wexler handed back quizzes without a word. One by one, papers returned, marks in red ink, comments in the margins. But Tiana's paper, nowhere in sight. She waited patiently. Then the bell rang. Class ended. She approached his desk. Excuse me, Mr. Wexler. I didn't get my quiz back. He didn't look up. You didn't? No, sir. He finally raised his eyes. Right. That's because I'm still reviewing it. Is there something wrong with it? There was a long pause. Too long. Well, he said, folding his hands over the desk. Your score was unusually high. I followed the standard methods. You can check my work. Oh, I have, he replied. And frankly, I'm considering submitting your quiz to the academic board for review. Tiana blinked. Why? He smiled. Tightly, without warmth. Because, Miss Brooks, in my experience, students don't usually jump into advanced calculus from day one and ace a quiz like that without assistance. The implication hung in the air. She stepped back, heat rushing to her cheeks. Not from guilt, but fury. Cold, bitter fury. You're saying I cheated. I'm saying your score was suspiciously high. Another student, still packing his bag, froze and glanced at them. Tiana's voice stayed low. You don't have proof of anything. No, he said, tone smooth. But I have standards. And when something doesn't add up, I investigate. She stood there for a moment, breathing through the humiliation. Not because of his words, but because of how easily they slipped from his mouth. How practiced, how casual. Then she turned and walked out. Back in his classroom, Wexler watched her go, tapping his fingers slowly on the desk. But he wasn't just reacting. He was planning. Unbeknownst to Wexler, someone had overheard the exchange. Leah Jordan, a junior seated near the front, had seen her older brother, another gifted black student, struggle under Wexler years ago. His story had been different, but the pattern was the same. Leah watched the door swing shut behind Tiana, then looked at her own quiz, which had a generous B for barely passing. Something twisted in her stomach, something she hadn't felt in years. That night, Tiana sat at her desk, redoing the quiz problems from memory, checking and rechecking her work. She didn't need to prove anything to herself, but she'd soon need to prove everything to everyone else. The next morning, Wexler tells the entire class that one quiz score was withheld for integrity concerns. And his eyes lock directly on Tiana. The air inside room 2013 was different that morning, thicker, heavier, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. Tiana sat at her desk, calm on the outside, but beneath the surface her nerves were coiled tight. She could feel eyes on her. Not just curious now, suspicious. Leah, seated near the front, glanced back with a furrowed brow. Even she seemed unsure whether to offer a look of support or stay silent like the rest. Mr. Wexler stood at the whiteboard, arms crossed. I want to address something before we begin today's lesson, he said, voice carefully measured. As educators, we hold academic integrity in the highest regard. And unfortunately, I've had to withhold one quiz score due to inconsistencies. A buzz of murmurs rippled through the classroom. He paused dramatically, scanning the room. His gaze landed, intentionally, on Tiana. Sometimes a score is so out of step with expectations, he continued, that we are obligated to verify it thoroughly. The message was clear, and it wasn't about academic policy. It was about her. Tiana stared back, unblinking, not defiant, just tired. The moment class ended, she was met at the door by a woman in a navy pantsuit, Assistant Principal Diane Kellerman. Tiana Brooks? The woman asked briskly. Come with me, please. The hallway seemed longer than usual, as they walked in silence, past classrooms, past the posters that read, "Excellence has no limits," past students who barely noticed them. But Tiana noticed everything. The way Mrs. Kellerman avoided eye contact, the way her heels clicked just a little too fast against the tile. Inside the principal's office, the blinds were half closed. Principal Harrelson sat behind his desk, mid-50s, balding, always slightly too formal, even in private meetings. Across from him sat Mr. Wexler, legs crossed, hands folded in his lap. "Tiana, please." Harrelson gestured to a seat. "Have a seat." She did, quietly. Harrelson leaned forward. "You're a new student here, and by all accounts you've adjusted well. Your teachers describe you as respectful, punctual, and academically strong." Wexler shifted in his seat. "However," Harrelson continued, "we've had concerns raised regarding your calculus quiz, specifically about the possibility of academic dishonesty." Tiana's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone level. "I didn't cheat." Wexler cleared his throat. Her answers were correct, but almost too perfect. No visible hesitation. And frankly, it doesn't align with the profile we have on file. Tiana turned to him, confused. "What profile?" He shrugged, as if the question were naive. "Your transcripts, average scores in other subjects, no standardized math competition scores, no prior AP classes. It's unusual for a student to enter at this level and ace a calculus quiz like this." "I worked every problem out in full," she said, voice low but steady. "Check my scratch work." "We did," Harrelson replied. "And while the work is thorough, the concern is, well, the speed and accuracy are atypical for a first quiz in this setting." "In this setting," she echoed. "Meaning a mostly white school?" Harrelson raised a hand, palms out. "That's not what we're implying." "No," Wexler interjected. "We're saying the score is inconsistent with her academic history. That's all." Tiana bit her lip, but didn't speak. Kellerman finally joined in. "We'd like to offer you a chance to demonstrate your knowledge. A makeup assessment. Different questions. Same topic. Taken here, in the conference room. No distractions. Just to clear things up." Tiana studied them, 3 adults, hiding fear of her brilliance behind polite suspicion. And something inside her began to shift. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was clarity. "Fine," she said. "I'll take it." "Today?" Harrelson asked, surprised. "Right now." Wexler blinked. "Well, we'd have to." "She said she's ready," Kellerman cut in. "Let's print a new assessment." 20 minutes later, Tiana sat alone in a small conference room, a fresh copy of the test placed in front of her. No phone, no notes, just a mechanical pencil and a blank sheet of scratch paper. A small camera in the corner blinked red, recording. Wexler watched through the window, arms crossed again. Kellerman sat nearby, supervising. Tiana took a breath. Then she began. No wasted motion. No scribbles. Her pencil moved with confidence, pausing only for brief moments, as her mind computed faster than her hand could write. She didn't fidget, didn't second guess. She was done in 27 minutes. Exactly half the allotted time. Kellerman blinked at the clock. "You're finished?" "Yes." Wexler entered the room as she handed in the paper. He flipped through it quickly, his eyes darting back and forth between answers and the original question sheet. He said nothing, but his knuckles whitened slightly as he gripped the pages. That afternoon, the faculty lounge was buzzing. Word had traveled fast. A junior transfer student, accused of cheating, had just aced a retest under supervision flawlessly. Still, Wexler was unmoved. She rehearsed the material, he told another teacher. Anyone can memorize patterns if they've seen them enough. But the quiz was randomized, someone muttered. He ignored it. Later that day, Tiana returned to her locker to find an anonymous note slipped between the vents. Folded in tight script. "They'll never admit they were wrong. Don't stop. They're scared of you." There was no name, no clue who left it. But for the first time since stepping into Willow Ridge, she felt less alone. Back in his office, Principal Harrelson sat at his desk, watching the footage from Tiana's test session. Her posture, her pacing, her calm. "She didn't cheat," he finally said aloud, almost to himself. Wexler, seated nearby, remained silent. "We should reinstate the quiz score." Wexler didn't look up. "We'll need to confirm her performance is repeatable. One quiz doesn't prove giftedness." Harrelson stared at him. "Or maybe it proves you were wrong." Silence. Then Wexler stood. "She's either memorizing or bluffing. And I don't bluff." That night, Wexler sits alone at his desk, reworking the test problems Tiana solved, only to realize he got 2 of them wrong himself. The Monday after her supervised retest, the air in Willow Ridge's math department was no longer still. It buzzed, quietly, awkwardly, like static before a storm. Word had traveled faster than Wexler could contain it. The new black girl, the one who probably cheated, had solved every problem again, only this time in half the time, and with full surveillance. In the break room, two junior math instructors whispered near the coffee machine. She got a perfect score? Every single one. But that test wasn't even the same as the first. Wexler heard the murmurs as he passed the open door. He didn't stop walking, but his jaw set tightly. His colleagues were talking about her as if she were some kind of anomaly. Not a student. Not a person. Just a phenomenon they didn't know how to process. And worse, they sounded impressed. Back in his classroom, he slammed a folder onto his desk harder than he meant to. A few students who had arrived early looked up, startled. One girl quickly tucked her phone away. Wexler didn't speak. He opened his laptop, but the screen just reflected his furrowed brow. In his head, the numbers replayed again. Two of the problems she'd solved under supervision were ones he hadn't gotten right when reworking them the night before. He'd blamed it on being tired, distraction, a fluke, but deep down, the truth gnawed at him. She was better than he expected. Maybe even better than he was. That couldn't be right. Tiana entered the room 2 minutes before the bell. Calm, as usual. She carried no expression on her face, but her eyes held something different. A quiet defiance, sharpened since her visit to the principal's office. She walked past him, not looking, and took her usual seat. The class was tense. A few students watched her openly now, their curiosity less hostile, more awed. A boy near the back leaned toward a classmate and whispered, "I heard she did the retest like a machine." Barely looked down. "Bet she's got some tutor feeding her the answers," the other replied. Whispers, giggles, and speculations swirled around her, like she wasn't there, like her brilliance was something they had to explain away, because accepting it meant acknowledging she was something else entirely, something that didn't fit their narrative. Tiana ignored them. She opened her notebook, quietly redrawing a diagram from memory. Wexler stood. "Let's begin." His tone was colder than usual, controlled. He scrawled an equation on the board, a warm-up, barely more than a review. Then another. As the class worked through them, he walked slowly up and down the aisles, glancing over shoulders. When he passed Tiana's desk, he stopped. Her paper was blank. "Problem too easy for you?" he asked, the sarcasm barely disguised. She met his gaze, evenly. "You said warm-ups weren't graded." "They're not. But effort still matters." She said nothing. As he returned to the board, Wexler's patience frayed. He could feel the narrative slipping away from him, and he wasn't about to let a 16-year-old rewrite it. Especially not her. Later that day, in the school's main office, Tiana's mother Alicia stood stiffly across from Principal Harrelson. Her voice was firm but calm, the way it got when she was holding back something far hotter. "I don't understand why my daughter's quiz was flagged in the first place," she said, "and now that she's proven herself twice, there's still no apology, no correction on her academic record?" Harrelson shuffled papers, not meeting her eyes. "Ms. Brooks, we're simply following procedure. The retest clears her, but we haven't finalized our decision on how to reflect the original incident. Because you still don't believe a black girl can outperform expectations." Harrelson tensed. "That's not fair." Alicia leaned forward slightly. "Neither is what you're doing to her." She placed a printed formal complaint on his desk. "I'll be taking this higher if it's not addressed." Harrelson stared at the document. The name Wexler printed 4 times. The words racial bias underlined in blue ink. Back in room 213, Wexler stood before the class with a new kind of fire in his eyes. "I've noticed a lot of chatter lately," he began, pacing slowly. "About scores. About ability. About anomalies." He paused at the word. "Let it settle. But this class is about more than just getting the right answer. It's about understanding, application, real thinking." He turned to the whiteboard, and then, with deliberate flourish, wrote an equation unlike anything they'd seen before. The room went quiet. "What is that?" a student asked. "It's not in the textbook," another whispered. "It's not supposed to be," Wexler said. "This problem is unsolved. It's theoretical, drawn from real research. NASA once posed it to doctoral candidates. No high schooler has cracked it." He capped the marker and turned to the class. "Anyone who wants to prove they're more than just a test score, give it a try." His eyes landed on Tiana. She didn't blink. "Due by the end of the week," he added smugly. "Let's see who's really thinking for themselves." The students exchanged nervous looks. Some stared at the board like it was in a different language. Others looked at Tiana waiting, expecting her to say something. But she didn't. She just reached for her pen. And slowly, without a word, started writing. In a quiet moment later that day, as Wexler erased another equation from the board, after class, he muttered to himself under his breath. She's not solving, she's memorizing. Has to be. But there was no certainty in the words. Only fear. Because deep down he'd seen something in her eyes that morning. Something even he couldn't fake. She wasn't guessing. She was seeing the solution. After school, Tiana sits in the library, staring at the impossible problem Wexler assigned, then slowly begins solving it in her head without writing anything down. For most students at Willow Ridge, the problem Wexler wrote on the board was just that, a problem. A curiosity to be observed, discussed briefly, and then forgotten by the time lunch rolled around. But for Tiana it wasn't a problem. It was a challenge, disguised as a message. A dare. The moment she copied it into her notebook, her world began to narrow. She barely noticed the bell ringing, or the thud of books closing around her. Her eyes were locked on the impossible sequence of symbols and abstract parameters, each one whispering to her subconscious like a language she almost understood. The problem, unknown to most of the students, wasn't just some brain teaser plucked from thin air. It had a name in academic circles: the Varus trajectory conundrum. 2 years earlier, NASA had quietly released it to several top university mathematics and aerospace engineering teams. It was based on a real spacecraft navigation issue, a theoretical limitation on orbital repositioning under multi-vector gravitational distortion. In simpler terms, how to predict movement when multiple forces were acting on an object simultaneously at variable rates. MIT couldn't solve it. Caltech had tried and published a dead end. A group at Stanford called it mathematically non-viable with current models. Wexler had found it buried in an old MIT research archive, late one night while looking for something obscure enough to stump even his most advanced students. It hadn't been solved. It had, in fact, been abandoned. And he assigned it like extra credit, a way to see who's really thinking. By the end of the week, no one turned anything in, except Tiana, and even she hadn't solved it. Not yet, but her submission was alive. Pages of equations, notes in the margins, hand-drawn 3D diagrams of multi-force vector simulations. She'd attached a list of questions, each sharper than the last, each proving not just effort, but insight. Her paper wasn't a solution, it was a threat to one. Wexler read it alone in his office, jaw tightening with each line. She was getting close. Too close. Over the next week, Tiana didn't stop. In the library, she commandeered an entire table, spreading her books and scratch paper in organized chaos. Geometry textbooks, physics journals, even a dusty astronomy manual she found in the back of the school's archives. The librarian tried to gently ask her to pack up before closing one evening, but Tiana's eyes didn't leave the page. She muttered something about inverse vectors and gravitational regression. She hadn't eaten lunch in 3 days. At night, her mother knocked on her bedroom door with a plate of food. "Baby, you need to rest. You haven't said more than 2 words in 3 days." "I'm close," was all Tiana said, without looking up. Her mother sighed, resting the plate down gently on the desk beside her. "You don't have to prove anything to them." But Tiana wasn't trying to prove it to them anymore. She was trying to prove it to herself. The problem had become more than numbers, more than theory. It was now a mirror, a test of how far her mind could stretch when no one believed in it but her. And it was breaking her down. She started falling asleep in class. Her handwriting grew shaky. Her eyes were red, her skin pale under the fluorescent lights. Even Leah, who had mostly watched from a distance, started to worry. "You look like you haven't slept in a year," she whispered during chem lab. "I haven't," Tiana replied, half joking. But the joke didn't land. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. Still, she pressed on. On the 4th night, just before 3 a.m., she sat hunched over her desk. A half-drunk glass of water sat beside her, long gone warm. A fan hummed in the background, stirring loose papers every so often. Her wall was now covered in taped-up scratch sheets, forming a constellation of ideas. She was down to one question, one sequence. Something clicked. Her eyes widened. It wasn't an equation she needed. It was a pattern in the residual error points. She stood up, walking backward from the paper, like it might reveal itself better from a distance. "Variable resistance isn't linear," she whispered. "It's elliptical. The distortion isn't fluctuating. It's echoing. It's echoing." She rushed to the whiteboard in her room. and began scribbling. Vectors turned into spirals. Constants morphed into functions. She connected two ideas she hadn't before: orbital drift and rhythmic gravitational interference. It made sense now. Not as a whole. Not yet. But the edges were forming. The impossible was becoming visible. She sat back down, dizzy. Her notebook trembled slightly as her hand wrote the next step. For the first time, the problem wasn't resisting her. It was unfolding. And someone was watching. Across the street, parked just far enough to avoid suspicion, a car sat idling. Inside, Assistant Principal Kellerman stared at her own printed copy of Tiana's first draft. She hadn't told Wexler what she'd done. Hadn't told him she'd sent it to a contact. A former NASA systems analyst, now working in academia. His response came in a single sentence texted late that night. "She's seeing something we didn't." Tiana circles a final variable on the board, then freezes, realizing it cancels a key assumption in NASA's original model. Tiana stood outside room 213. On Friday morning, a thick folder pressed tightly to her chest. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but they gleamed with a fierce kind of clarity. The kind of look people get when they've gone too far to turn back. She inhaled deeply, counted to 3, and stepped inside. The classroom was half full, students murmuring and joking in their seats, unaware of the significance of what she held. Wexler stood at the whiteboard, uncapping a dry erase marker with his usual briskness. But the moment she crossed the threshold, his eyes found her. She walked past him silently and placed the folder on his desk, labeled with her name in clean, careful print. Tiana Brooks, Varus Trajectory Response. "What's this?" he asked, flipping it open. "My solution," she said. He skimmed the first page, then the second, his brow twitching as his eyes darted over complex notation and 3D vector projections annotated by hand. His smirk came quickly. "This is elaborate," he muttered, loud enough for nearby students to hear. Tiana didn't respond. She walked to her seat and opened her notebook like it was just another day. Wexler's laugh came soft but sharp, cutting the air like glass. "You do know this wasn't graded, right? The point wasn't to write a novel, it was to challenge yourselves." "I know," Tiana replied without looking up. "You said it was for those who think for themselves." His lips curled, eyes dancing with condescension. "And I'm sure you think you've cracked it." "I don't think," she said. "I checked." Some students looked up now, sensing something brewing. Wexler flipped another page, then closed the folder with a loud snap. "This is nonsense. Half these assumptions contradict orbital physics. You don't even understand the fundamentals of variable inertia." "She understands it more than you," someone muttered near the back. Wexler's head turned sharply. "What was that?" But the voice didn't repeat itself. The bell rang, ending the moment.
Nedits.
That afternoon, Wexler left the folder on the teacher's desk in the faculty lounge, open as if mocking its own content. He barely noticed the substitute sitting quietly in the corner. Mr. Jameson, a soft-spoken younger man covering an advanced physics class for a teacher on medical leave. Jameson glanced down at the folder as Wexler walked out. He flipped it open and read, then read more, then stopped. The notations were sophisticated, unusual, handwritten with purpose. She wasn't parroting textbook theory. She was applying original thought. His breath caught when he reached the variable field reductions. This wasn't just impressive. This was innovative. Jameson had interned at NASA 4 years ago. He knew the problem. He'd seen a confidential version of the original research. The structure of her work, it was scarily close to what some NASA engineers had proposed in internal white papers. He glanced around the empty lounge, pulled out his phone, and took a single photo of one annotated page. That night, from his private account, he posted it with a simple caption: "High school student proposes solution for problem even grad programs struggled with." "Who is she?" Within hours, the post was reposted by a former JPL systems engineer, then by a prominent astrophysicist, then by a professor from Princeton. By noon the next day, it had 82,000 retweets. By evening, academic Twitter had found its latest obsession. Tiana Brooks. The anonymous photo didn't show her face, but it showed her name, scrawled in cursive at the top of the page. And that was enough. Professors began breaking down parts of her work in threads. Experts debated her approach. Some called it genius, others argued it needed refinement, but all agreed on one thing. Whoever this student was, she wasn't just guessing. She was thinking. Back at Willow Ridge, The staff began receiving emails from journalists. Wexler stormed into the main office the next morning, folder in hand, ranting about unauthorized distribution and social media sensationalism. Principal Harrelson rubbed his temples. "Did you send this to anyone?" "Of course not," Wexler snapped. "I left it in the lounge for feedback, not for it to be turned into a damn media circus." Jameson remained quiet. Alicia Brooks received the call from a blocked number at 6:13.
Is this the parent of Tiana Brooks?
"Yes." "Who's calling?" "This is Dr. Mallory from the NASA Mathematics Division. We'd like to speak with your daughter." Alicia's heart stopped. "Excuse me?" "We came across some notes attributed to her online. We believe her work has implications relevant to ongoing research. Would she be willing to join a virtual meeting with our team?" Alicia covered the receiver, her voice shaking. "Tiana, sweetheart, come here now." Upstairs, Tiana sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by notes, still running calculations in her head. She had no idea the world was now watching. She had no idea Wexler had tried to dismiss her solution to his colleagues just hours earlier, still fuming about her arrogance. And she had no idea that in that moment, thousands of people were talking about her work, arguing, praising, dissecting, because while Wexler saw her as a threat, the world had started to see her as a voice, a mind, a name worth knowing. As Tiana takes the phone and hears the words, "We've been looking for you, Wexler," opens his laptop to find his own name trending for all the wrong reasons. On Tuesday morning, the usually slow-moving front office at Willow Ridge High was in quiet disarray. Phones buzzed. The principal's assistant spoke in hushed tones. A custodian was polishing the hallway floor twice as fast as usual. Something had shifted, and the reason wore a slim black suit, a NASA ID clipped neatly to her breast pocket, and a no-nonsense look that left little room for questions. Dr. Serena Miles had arrived. The administrator greeting her barely managed a smile as he escorted her down the corridor. Word had traveled fast, again this time, within the building. A NASA representative, at Willow Ridge, for a student. No one needed to ask which one. In the faculty lounge, Wexler stood near the coffee machine, swirling creamer into a cup he hadn't touched. The room was colder somehow. Teachers whispered around him, exchanging glances. When the assistant principal popped his head in, there was no need to say her name. "Dr. Miles is here." Wexler exhaled once, slowly, then followed. Principal Harrelson had already laid out coffee and bottled water in the conference room, a gesture of hospitality more performative than genuine. Dr. Miles took a seat at the table, flipping open her leather-bound folder. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. "I'm here," she began, "because one of your students submitted what appears to be a structurally sound solution to a highly complex gravitational trajectory model. A problem our division had marked unsolved for years." Wexler shifted in his seat. "I understand the excitement, but the work is amateur. The solution lacks foundational rigor." She overgeneralized an entire variable set. Dr. Miles looked up. "And yet she identified a recurring vector behavior no one on our team caught in 3 years." Wexler paused. "I'd like to speak with Tiana Brooks directly," she continued. "With your permission, Principal Harrelson." Harrelson nodded. "We'll call her from class." Wexler folded his arms. "Before you do, I think it's worth noting that Tiana's sudden rise has caused considerable disruption in my classroom. She's drawing attention for reasons unrelated to academic merit." Dr. Miles blinked once. Slowly. "Are you suggesting her solution is invalid because it caused too much conversation?" "I'm saying it's possible she had help. Tutoring. Outside coaching. Someone may have walked her through the math." Dr. Miles didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pulled a printed thread from her folder. Several pages of annotated comments from MIT, Princeton and JPL professionals breaking down Tiana's equations. "You believe this level of insight was coached?" Wexler hesitated. "It's uncharacteristic. For a student like her?" she asked quietly. Harrelson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Dr. Miles leaned forward. "Let me rephrase that. Why wasn't Tiana Brooks recommended to any of our high school STEM feeder programs? She's in your AP class. We've had partnership grants here for 2 years." Wexler said nothing. "Well," Dr. Miles asked again. "There were other students," Wexler said. Dr. Miles closed her folder, but none of them made the math community stop and stare. She stood up. "I'll speak with Ms. Brooks now." Tiana was called from her calculus class. She walked into the office with no idea who she was meeting. only that something big was happening. When she saw the badge clipped to the woman's lapel, she froze mid-step. "Ms. Brooks," Dr. Miles said, standing. "I'm Dr. Serena Miles, NASA Mathematics Division." Tiana's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Dr. Miles extended her hand. "I've reviewed your work. You're ahead of your time." Tiana shook it, heart thudding so loudly she could barely hear. "I came to validate the authorship of the equations," Dr. Miles said gently. "You wrote them yourself?" "Yes," Tiana whispered. "No outside help?" Tiana shook her head. "No one would have known what I was talking about." Dr. Miles smiled for the first time. "Good, because we'd like to invite you to our Young Thinkers panel. You'll join students from across the country in a collaborative mentorship program, weekly seminars, full access to our mathematicians, and if you're ready, a chance to present at the National STEM Summit." Tiana blinked. "Present? In front of scientists, educators, and researchers from around the world." A beat passed. "I don't think I'm ready," she said quietly. "Neither did the last girl who joined," Dr. Miles said. "She's now interning at Langley." From the hallway, Wexler watched through the cracked door, eyes narrowing. He turned and walked briskly toward the main office. Inside Principal Harrelson's office, he didn't knock. "If she goes through with this, I walk," he said. Harrelson looked up, stunned. "You what?" "She's making a mockery of my curriculum." "You think I'm going to sit here and watch a student bypass every protocol, skip peer review, and get a national spotlight handed to her on a silver plate?" "She earned it," Harrelson said. "She challenged me. Publicly. And you want me to endorse her?" "I won't." Harrelson leaned back in his chair, choosing his next words carefully. "Then maybe this is your exit." Wexler's face paled. "You're not untouchable," Harrelson added. "You've been here for decades. Yes, but people talk. And lately, they've been talking louder." For the first time in years, Wexler didn't have a comeback. By the end of the week, the announcement came over the PA system during morning roll call. "Congratulations to junior Tiana Brooks, who has been selected to present her mathematical work at the National STEM Summit in Atlanta next month. She will represent both our school and the NASA Young Thinkers panel. Please give her your support." The class went silent. Some students clapped. Some just stared. And Wexler? He stood at the front of room 213, jaw clenched, marker frozen in his hand. Tiana kept her eyes on the board. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. As she walks out of the room at the end of class, a student slips her a note. Inside is a warning. "They're going to try to ruin you. Be ready." The ballroom of the Atlanta Grand Conference Center shimmered under the hum of 1,000 conversations, light bouncing off polished marble, and navy blue banners embroidered with gold. National STEM Summit 2025. Minds that move the world. The energy was electric. Cameras flashed. Scientists mingled with educators, and scouts from Ivy League universities leaned against walls with tablets in hand, silently judging everything they saw. Tiana stood backstage, gripping the edge of her notes so tightly that the edges wrinkled. Her navy blazer, tailored the night before by a friend of her mother's, hung stiffly on her shoulders. She had never been in a room like this. Never felt the weight of so many eyes she couldn't even see yet. Behind the curtain, names were being announced one by one, each followed by polite applause and a short academic biography. Next up, from Willow Ridge High School in Virginia, Tiana Brooks presenting a revised model for multi-vector gravitational drift dynamics. Her breath caught. Then she walked. The moment she stepped into the light, the room shifted. Not loudly, not obviously, but in waves. Some people clapped, but slower. A few eyebrows lifted. A woman in a Stanford sweatshirt squinted, as if trying to match the name on the program to the girl standing on stage. Others leaned to whisper behind their hands. Because standing beside students in blazers stitched with Caltech, Harvard, and MIT, Tiana looked different. Not just younger, not just less polished. Black. Alone. Unapologetically herself. She adjusted the mic. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm but low. "What I'm presenting today is a reinterpretation of a previously unresolved NASA model, involving gravitational interference under multi-directional pull." The words came easily, like lines from a story she'd told 1,000 times in her head. But her eyes flicked to the judges' table, where a row of top engineers and professors sat silently, flipping through her handout. In the front row, a man in a Yale lanyard scribbled something quickly. A woman from Princeton tilted her head and mouthed something to a colleague. One judge stared openly, not at her slides, but at her. Tiana didn't falter. She broke down the problem. Her voice grew stronger as she moved from premise to approach, sketching simplified vectors on the screen. Then came the pattern she'd discovered, the one that turned equations into music. Previous models assumed gravitational resistance fluctuated linearly, she said, tapping her slide. But in orbital tests, patterns emerge more elliptically, in echoing sequences. Her final slide lit the room. A clean, four-phase model. Her signature on the bottom right corner. The room held its breath. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then one judge leaned forward, lips parting as he stared at the final formula. Another whispered to his colleague, she just mapped the drift through oscillation cycles, without regression. Wait! How did she? Tiana stepped back from the podium, hands trembling now behind her back. Applause came, not thunderous but sharp, genuine, and from the right corners. People were looking at her differently. Not like a token, not like an exception, but like a contender. Backstage, a panel coordinator offered her a bottle of water and a shaky smile. You just made a lot of people sweat, she joked. Tiana took the water but didn't laugh. Her heart was still racing. Out front, university reps clustered near her handouts, murmuring in knots. But not everyone clapped. In the third row, a man sat with his arms crossed, head tilted, studying her the way one might study a crack in a window, close enough to see it, not close enough to admit it matters. Wexler. He hadn't been invited. He hadn't been expected. But he was there, alone, dressed in a beige blazer, an expressionless face. He leaned toward a woman with a press badge and whispered something into her ear. She looked up quickly, scribbling on a notepad. Tiana didn't see him yet, but someone else did. Dr. Serena Miles, seated with NASA's delegation, narrowed her eyes. Wexler whispered again. The reporter nodded. Backstage, a volunteer handed Tiana her participant badge, smiling. Dr. Mallory wants to speak with you again later. They're saying your work might push forward 2 internal tests. Tiana nodded slowly, still reeling. As she turned to step off the stage stairs, her gaze swept the audience, and caught him. At first she thought she imagined it. But no, Mr. Wexler, sitting dead center, watching her like she'd stolen something. She blinked. For a split second everything came rushing back. His voice, his doubt, his dismissal. Your kind don't usually do well in this subject. She swallowed hard. Wexler didn't look away. Neither did she. Outside, the media area buzzed with reporters prepping interviews. The Stanford student team had already set up in front of a camera, and 2 MIT seniors answered questions about their model on electric propulsion stability. Tiana waited quietly near a potted plant, her badge slightly crooked, her head spinning. Dr. Miles approached, holding her phone. We need to talk, she said quietly. One of the reporters just asked me if you plagiarized your solution. Tiana blinked. What? They said a faculty member from your school raised concerns about your sudden excellence. Miles's eyes darkened. They didn't name him, but we both know who it was. For a moment, Tiana just stood there, the crowd moving around her in slow motion. She had just stood on one of the biggest STEM stages in the country, and proven herself. And still they came. Still, they doubted. Still, they whispered. Miles placed a hand gently on her shoulder. We're not backing down. We're going to handle this. Tiana nodded once, slowly, though the knot in her throat didn't loosen. As the summit ends, and cameras flash, the press releases a headline, NASA's rising star or fabricated genius. Willow Ridge teacher questions black students' credentials. The summit had barely ended when the first ripple of doubt hit the internet. On Monday morning, while students at Willow Ridge filed through metal lockers and rehashed the weekend's football scores, a headline quietly circulated among school staff, university inboxes, and eventually Twitter. Is the NASA girl a fraud? The article came from an anonymous source. No byline, no legitimate publication, just a blog-style domain, masked under academic-sounding credentials, STEMintegritywatch.org. But it was written with surgical malice, pointed questions wrapped in professional skepticism. Unprecedented brilliance is often met with admiration, but also scrutiny. Can a high school junior with no formal mentorship truly solve a problem that stumped doctoral candidates? The article dissected Tiana's timeline with eerie precision, her school transfer, her quiz controversy, even her so-called overnight genius. Embedded within it were photos pulled from her old social media, a younger Tiana at a tutoring center, a snapshot of her attending a summer math camp, a cropped shot of her hugging her mother outside a community college lecture hall. Then the quotes came, pulled out of context, bent to fit a narrative. She always asked for help. Sometimes it felt like she didn't trust her own answers. Anonymous classmate. She got a lot of special attention. Not all of us did. Unnamed teacher. There was no proof, no author. But it didn't matter. The seed had been planted. And it spread like wildfire. By noon, hashtags started appearing. Ana Sahoax. Token math girl. Too good to be true. Her inbox flooded. So did her school email. Anonymous messages. Some subtle. Others vicious. Your 15 minutes are up. You didn't solve that. You can't solve that. Go back to where you came from. Tiana stared at her phone until the screen blurred with tears. She logged out of everything. Deleted apps. But the noise didn't stop. It had spilled into the hallway. In-class students whispered louder than usual. One boy coughed the word plagiarism when she walked in. Another girl smirked at her and whispered, "Did you actually go to NASA? Or did you just Photoshop that too?" She sat down slowly, hands shaking under the desk. For the first time, she didn't pull out her notebook. In the teacher's lounge, things weren't better. Dr. Miles had reached out publicly on Twitter to reaffirm Tiana's place in the mentorship program. But the school board had started getting calls from concerned parents, repeating the same question: how could this happen without them knowing? That afternoon, behind closed doors, Wexler was quietly reinstated. The board cited procedural missteps in the decision to sideline him, despite ongoing personality conflicts. No mention of bias. No mention of the complaint Alicia Brooks filed. He returned to room 213 without fanfare, just a nod from the assistant principal, and a new marker in hand. And a smug satisfaction in his eyes. Tiana didn't go to class the next day. She didn't eat. Didn't speak. Her mother hovered near her bedroom door, unsure whether to push or let her grieve. Inside, Tiana sat in silence, the light from her desk lamp casting long shadows across her wall of equations. She'd stopped looking at them. They didn't mean anything now. Because what was the point? Her whole life, she had believed brilliance would be enough. That if she studied hard enough, solved what no one else could, kept her head down, and let the numbers speak louder than her skin, she'd be accepted. But even the math had turned against her now. Or maybe it never mattered in the first place. She reached for her notebook, then paused. Let her hand fall. That night, Wexler stood outside room 213, speaking softly to a school board liaison. She was never ready for this kind of pressure, he said. Gifted or not, some students don't belong in a spotlight they didn't earn. She's not in any disciplinary trouble, right? The liaison asked. Wexler shrugged. Not officially. But when things collapse under scrutiny, we have to ask the hard questions. Fair enough. Wexler smiled thinly. Integrity matters. On Wednesday afternoon, as Tiana sat beneath the bleachers alone, a shadow approached. She looked up slowly. It was Leah Jordan, the same girl who had whispered words of warning in earlier weeks, but always stayed at the edge of things. She held a flash drive in her hand. Hey! Tiana didn't respond at first. Then, don't feel sorry for me. I don't, Leah said. I'm furious. She held up the flash drive. You need to see what's on this. Tiana blinked. What is it? Evidence, Leah whispered. Proof that Wexler's been doing this for years. She sat down beside her, careful not to draw attention. I found old grade reports. Archived student feedback. He's failed every black student in AP Calculus since 2010. Every single one. Even when their other grades were perfect. Tiana stared at her, stunned. I dug through old yearbooks, Leah continued. Found 2 students who dropped out after taking his class. One tried to file a complaint. Buried. I talked to someone whose transcript got mysteriously misfiled. Senior year, and lost a scholarship. Why hasn't anyone said anything? Tiana asked, voice cracking. Because it's quiet racism, Leah said. The kind no one wants to admit exists. The kind you almost believe might be your fault. Tiana's throat tightened. You didn't make this up, Tay, Leah said gently. He did, and now we've got the receipts. That night, Tiana sat in front of her laptop again, staring at the flash drive icon on the screen. She clicked it open. Screenshots, emails, annotated grade patterns, old complaints ignored, even a PDF of a student essay titled Fighting Numbers: What It's Like to Be Black and Brilliant in Mr. Wexler's Class. It was dated. She scrolled to the bottom. A handwritten note from the student. They'll never believe me, but maybe one day they'll believe someone like me. Tiana's hands trembled. The truth wasn't just about her. This was bigger. Tiana opens a new file titled The Pattern and begins writing her own account, planning to go public. Tiana's hands hovered over her keyboard, the screen glowing dimly in the shadows of her bedroom. On it, a blank document bore the title The Pattern. But before she could type another word, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Leah. "Meet Eli. You're gonna want to see this." The message included a location, a quiet corner booth at the back of a downtown library. An hour later, Tiana and Leah sat across from a lanky, sharp-eyed young man with a faded hoodie, tapping away at a laptop that looked older than all of them combined. "Name's Eli Ramirez," he said without looking up. "Graduated Willow Ridge in 2019. I was valedictorian. Or, should have been." Tiana blinked. "You were in Wexler's class?" Eli nodded. "Topped every test. Got 89.4% as a final grade. Conveniently 0.6% short of an A. It tanked my scholarship offers. Said it was a grading error. I believed it, until 2 months ago, when I stumbled across a backup of the student archive system, hidden in an old directory I was hired to clean up for the district." He turned the laptop toward them. On the screen was a spreadsheet. Names, grades, notes. Eli pointed. "See that? Every black student Wexler's had for over a decade. There's a discrepancy. Either their final grade drops sharply, or there's a sudden plagiarism note, added mid-semester." Tiana leaned in. "That's impossible." "No," Eli said, scrolling. "It's intentional." One entry stood out. Alasia Gordon 2017. Assignment flagged possible copied work. No evidence. Another Tariq Nelson. 2015 participation downgraded. Disruptive tone during lecture. Disruptive tone. Tiana repeated, voice brittle. "That's how they erase us." Eli nodded. "They buried everything. Student complaints. Even one filed by a teacher's assistant in 2016. It was deleted, but I recovered it." Wexler called a black student's work suspiciously articulate. A silence stretched between them. Sharp and heavy. "He's not just racist," Leah murmured. "He's systematic." Tiana sat back, the weight of it all closing in. "I thought it was just me," she said. "That's what he counts on," Eli replied. "Isolation, silence." "Not this time." The next day, Tiana sat beside her mother in the cramped office of a local investigative journalist, a former high school teacher turned reporter for a regional paper with a growing online platform. On the desk sat a USB drive, wrapped in a sticky note that read, "For real truth." Alicia Brooks leaned forward, her voice calm but icy. "My daughter has endured harassment, discrediting and slander for doing what no one else in her class could. And now we find out this teacher has been sabotaging students of color for years. We're done being quiet." The journalist, eyes wide, clicked through the files. Grade manipulations, flagged student notes, emails between Wexler and administration with coded language. He sat back slowly. "This is going national." Within 48 hours, the headline exploded. "Racist teacher suppressed black genius for over a decade. Whistleblower exposes Virginia school cover-up." It hit like a grenade. National news outlets picked it up. TikTok and Twitter flooded with hashtags. "Justice for Tiana." "Erase Wexler." "Not just one." Old students began commenting, sharing their stories. One woman from Florida said she transferred schools after being humiliated by Wexler in 2012. Another shared a grainy photo of a graded paper with the words "too complex for a student at your level" scrawled in red ink. CNN and MSNBC requested interviews. Even NASA released a statement reaffirming Tiana's work and condemning barriers faced by underrepresented youth in STEM education. Willow Ridge High tried to contain the blast, but the school board was already under fire. Protesters lined the entrance with signs. Parents demanded resignations. A petition to remove Wexler gathered over 300,000 signatures in 3 days. Principal Harrelson, cornered by press cameras outside the school, fumbled to answer. We were unaware of the full scope." "If these allegations prove true," "They're not allegations," shouted a woman from the crowd. "They're data." Inside the building, faculty split down the middle, some defending Wexler with phrases like long-standing educator and unfair media pressure, while others expressed regret they hadn't looked closer, hadn't spoken louder. But by the time the board launched an internal investigation, Wexler had already gone dark. No classes. No public statements. Just a message through his union rep stating he was cooperating privately. But he wasn't. Late that Friday night, a neighbor heard sounds coming from Wexler's garage. Soft at first, then louder, boxes being moved, papers shuffled, something tearing. Curious, the neighbor walked outside to retrieve a package, then noticed a flicker of orange behind Wexler's side door window. Inside, Wexler was hunched over a stack of papers, files, printouts, old manila folders from years past. He tore through them, hands shaking, sweat beading down his forehead. Names, grades. He tossed some into a trash bag, others into a fireplace he'd lit in the small room behind his study. He wasn't cooperating. He was erasing. One folder slipped from his hand. A photo of a black student from 2015 fell to the floor. Paper clipped to a disciplinary note with attitude problems scrawled across the top. He didn't pick it up. Outside, the neighbor, unsure whether to call the police or the press, raised her phone and hit record. The next morning, the video surfaces online. Wexler caught red-handed, burning documents at 1:17 a.m. The video of Colin Wexler burning documents at 1:17 a.m. played on every screen in the Willow Ridge district office, replayed frame by frame, like a scene from a documentary. The footage, shaky but damning, showed him tossing manila folders and loose papers into a small, glowing fireplace. No attempt to hide it, no panic in his face, just methodical destruction. Within hours, the school board was forced to act. A civil hearing was formally launched. Though not a criminal trial yet, it was televised locally due to overwhelming public interest and national attention. The board convened in a packed auditorium turned courtroom, every seat filled, cameras in the back, and protest signs outside the glass doors that read, "Belief in brilliance shouldn't be color-coded." She solved the math. Now solve the system. Wexler entered through a side door, flanked by attorneys. His appearance had changed. His usually pristine tie was slightly crooked. His skin, paler than usual. But he walked with a confidence that only decades of unaccountable power could teach a man. He did not look sorry. He looked annoyed. At the front of the room sat the 5 members of the Education Oversight Board, 3 of them visibly uncomfortable, the other 2 hardened by years of dealing with legal loopholes and public outrage. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to make Wexler answer. We're here today to investigate the allegations of racial discrimination, academic sabotage, and misconduct against Mr. Colin Wexler. The board chair began, her voice firm. This hearing is a public matter due to the widespread impact on current and former students. The first to testify was Alicia Gordon, now 25, flown in from North Carolina by the ACLU. She wore a powder blue suit and trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. "When I was in Mr. Wexler's class, I thought I was just bad at math," she said. "He made me feel that way. I remember solving problems in class and getting them marked wrong. He'd say things like, 'That's not how we do it here.'" The board nodded, scribbling notes. Alicia paused. "But I wasn't wrong, I just wasn't believable." When she finished, a hush fell over the room. Her hands were shaking as she stepped down. The next speaker was Tariq Nelson, now a software engineer. His voice didn't shake. "On my second week in Wexler's class, I answered a proof on the board." He stared at it for 5 minutes, then erased the whole thing and said, "You people can't think logically. Emotion always gets in the way." Gasps. Audible. The moderator asked him to repeat the quote. He did. "I told my parents. They told the principal. The principal said Wexler denied it, and that I had misinterpreted tone. That's the only report card I ever got a D on." Wexler, sitting at his table, shifted uncomfortably for the first time. As the parade of testimonies continued, a pattern emerged. Always the same. Students of color doubted, their accomplishments minimized, their confidence slowly chipped away. One student cried while recounting the time Wexler handed back her paper and whispered, "I hope this wasn't your best effort. You're already behind." Parents sat in the audience, stunned. Some wept. And then it was Tiana's turn. She walked to the front in a black blouse and gray slacks, composed but trembling slightly as she approached the mic. Cameras flashed. Microphones extended. She cleared her throat once. "I was told from day one that I didn't belong," she began, not directly, but in all the ways that count. She looked at Wexler, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't look back. He said, "Your kind don't do well in this subject. When I scored high, it was suspicious. When I solved what others couldn't, it was a trick." The board leaned in. He wanted me small, invisible, But when I couldn't shrink enough, he tried to erase me. A pause. I didn't cheat, I didn't steal anyone's work. I did the math. And he tried to make the world believe I couldn't possibly be that smart, because I didn't look like the kind of person who should be. Her voice cracked. But I am. I am that smart. The room fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Then someone unidentified clapped once, then another, and another, until the entire room was filled with the kind of applause not meant for performance but for resistance. Wexler finally spoke 2 hours into the hearing. He denied everything. I was a demanding teacher, he said, voice cold but controlled. I expected the best. If some students felt discouraged, it was because the material is difficult. STEM isn't for everyone. One board member asked, "Do you deny ever using racial language?" I never used racially charged terms. Any quote presented today is either fabricated or misinterpreted. Do you deny flagging Tayana Brooks' quiz score as suspiciously high? I stand by that decision. Her previous records didn't align with the performance. And what of the burned documents? I was cleaning out old files, nothing malicious. But you did so at 1:17 a.m., the chair said, off-site, unsupervised. I was cleaning personal records, not school documents. It wasn't convincing, but his legal team built a wall around him, just enough doubt to slow momentum. Until the twist. Halfway through deliberations, an IT forensic specialist from the district entered the record room, carrying a sealed evidence bag, Wexler's personal computer, seized 2 days prior under subpoena, encrypted files, hidden folders, restored documents from the recycle bin, including one file titled Contingency Notes, Math Placement Overrides. It contained Excel sheets of grade modifications. Dozen, each one with a pattern. Names, ethnicity columns. Comments like, recommend B max, overconfident, possible code switch, adjust down, not likely college ready, inflate red flags. Gasps erupted. Even the board chair's pen slipped from her hand. There was no defense. Even Wexler's lawyers sat stunned. One leaned over and whispered something. Wexler's face drained. The final screen displayed a sentence typed in a draft email never sent. If she presents at the summit, it'll unravel everything. She's smarter than I thought. As the hearing is suspended for deliberation, news breaks outside. 3 more teachers across the district are being investigated for similar grade tampering. The contents of Wexler's hard drive spread like digital wildfire through education and civil rights circles, shocking even those who thought they had seen it all. What began as the fall of a single teacher now threatened to crack open a deeper, uglier truth. It hadn't been just Wexler. Inside folders marked internal notes, mentorship review, and evaluation overrides were dozens of emails between Wexler and other staff members, some retired, some still employed. One subject line read, concerns about over-enthusiastic placement requests. Inside, we may need to redirect AP candidates more selectively. Strong emotion can often mask a lack of real logic. Another, too many students from one demographic showing up in higher-level STEM could dilute standards. These weren't accidents. This wasn't overreaction. It was deliberate. A soft-coded suppression system that had existed right under the district's nose for over a decade, disguised as rigor, camouflaged in professionalism. And it wasn't only Wexler. 2 assistant principals and 1 school counselor were quietly placed on administrative leave. The same day the files went public, the district released a cautious statement acknowledging failures in oversight and promising a full review of hiring, grading, and placement practices. But it was too late to patch the cracks. Protesters flooded the district offices for the 3rd day in a row, chanting, "They buried brilliance. Education without bias. No more quiet racism." News vans parked outside the school board headquarters. Parents screamed into microphones, demanding accountability. Students carried signs with equations that now symbolized resistance. A once sleepy school district had become a national case study in structural bias. And at the center of it all was a girl who had only wanted to solve a math problem. Colin Wexler was formally charged with academic misconduct, intentional grade tampering, and racial discrimination under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. He offered no public apology, no press conference, no resignation letter. His lawyers negotiated a quiet early retirement, pending civil litigation and potential criminal referrals. His name was stripped from every classroom roster. His old classroom door was removed entirely. But the scar he left behind? That would take much longer to heal. In the days following the hearing, Tayana received offers that would make most students' heads spin. Full scholarships from MIT, Princeton, UCLA, and a special letter of invitation from Howard University, citing her as a symbol of modern Black excellence in STEM. Her mailbox overflowed with congratulations. Universities she'd never even heard from were reaching out. STEM summer programs offered her speaker slots. High school STEM teachers across the country emailed asking if she'd video chat with their classes. Strangers called her a hero, but inside she wasn't sure what she felt. One evening, she sat with her mother on their worn living room couch, flipping through thick acceptance folders like they were postcards. They should have felt like victory. They didn't. "You always said college would change everything," she whispered. Her mother looked at her, tired but proud. "And it still can." Tiana stared down at an open envelope. From Yale. "But what if I just end up the smartest girl in another room that doesn't want me there?" Alicia's voice was quiet. "Then you tear that room down. Or you build your own." Tiana was silent for a moment. "Then, what if I stayed?" Her mother blinked. "Stayed. Not forever," she clarified. "But rebuilt something. Here, at Willow Ridge. Started a mentorship program. Tutored the kids they overlooked. Built a pipeline so no one like me ever has to do this alone again." "You'd be giving up a lot," her mother said. "I already gave up too much pretending I had to leave to matter." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged. Purposeful. Tiana didn't need to be told what the world expected of her anymore. She was rewriting that too. That night, she opened her email for the first time in days. Over 300 unread messages. One stood out. Subject: a next step. "If you're ready." From Dr. Renee Olumide, NASA Astrodynamics Division. Tiana clicked. "Tiana, I was part of the team that reviewed your orbital drift model. I've never seen someone your age, or frankly any age, identify residual echo behavior with such clarity. You made something abstract feel simple. We're starting a new lunar trajectory optimization project at NASA Ames. It's still early stage, but your model aligns with several of our early concepts. If you're interested, we want you on the team. We'll mentor you, and you'll contribute for real. Let me know. Either way, you've already changed how we think. Dr. Renee Olumide." Tiana stared at the screen. Then she smiled. Not because someone believed in her. Because she no longer needed them to. She begins typing her reply, then pauses, eyes narrowing. She's just received a DM from a private account, with a screenshot. Wexler, logged into a teacher forum, under an alias, spreading false claims about her again. The sun rose early over Silicon Valley that summer. Golden light pouring across the glass and steel curves of the NASA Ames Research Center. Tiana Brooks stepped through the revolving doors of Building 201, badged, cleared, and with a badge of her own now clipped to her chest. It read, "Tiana Brooks, visiting researcher, Orbital Dynamics Division, 17 years old. The youngest in the room. But no one called her a prodigy anymore. Not here. Not where the math did the talking. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was here to build." Assigned to a sub-team working on trajectory modeling for small spacecraft maneuverability, Tiana was paired with Dr. Renee Olumide, the same woman who had sent her the invitation email just weeks earlier. "This is where your variable echo model lives now," Dr. Olumide told her, handing over a set of encrypted datasets. "No pressure, but your concept shaved 0.7% off our last mission drift." Tiana blinked. "That's not nothing. It's the kind of not nothing that saves millions in fuel costs. You changed the curve," and she had. The equation Wexler had mocked as nonsense, the one she had scribbled by lamplight on paper scraps and library napkins, was now integrated into real-time calculations used to simulate lunar approach maneuvers. The problem NASA had given up on? She hadn't. And now NASA hadn't either. Her days blurred into the rhythm of code reviews, simulations, debrief meetings. By the second week, she was no longer the girl from the article. She was just Tiana, the one who could simplify chaos. Her diagrams were passed from one team to the next. Engineers requested to sit in on her breakout sessions. A quiet, chain-reactive respect built around her, earned not from a title but from the clarity in her logic. Late one evening, as the office lights dimmed and staff filtered out, Dr. Olumide found her still at her desk, running a loop of simulations, with new parameter constraints. "You should go outside at least once today," she teased. Tiana glanced up, smiling tiredly. "I'm close to reducing prediction error below 0. Dr. Olumide chuckled. I forget you're still technically in high school. Tiana's smile faded a little. Not for long. MIT's still holding your spot. They are. So is Princeton. But I might defer. Why? Tiana hesitated. Because I want to build something for people like me. Not just work for the ones who already have everything. Olumide nodded slowly. You don't have to choose. Sometimes the best way to fight the system is from within it. Tiana looked back at the screen, numbers flowing, steady, and honest. Maybe I'll do both. A week later, she sat under bright lights in a national studio for a televised segment called The New Math Vanguard. Across from her, the host flipped through a sleek tablet. You were once accused of cheating on a quiz, he said. Now your math is part of NASA's active models. How did that feel? Tiana paused. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to say it right. I used to think the hardest part would be solving the equation, she said. But the hardest part was convincing people I could. The host leaned in. Is there anything you'd like to say to the people who doubted you? Tiana shook her head. It's not about them. It never was. Then she smiled softly, like a secret finally released. It's about every kid sitting in a desk right now, trying to make themselves smaller to fit a system that wasn't built for them. I want them to know brilliance doesn't have a color. The clip went viral. But it wasn't her name that trended. It was a quote, one that had once been a wound, now transformed into a war cry. Your kind don't do math. It spread like wildfire, flipped on its head. Students made posters. Teachers made lesson plans. Black students began posting their own achievements under the hashtag. T-shirts were printed. A mural went up in Atlanta, with Tiana's face beside Katherine Johnson's. The insult became a badge of resistance, and then of ownership. And then, a letter came, delivered by courier to her dorm at the research center. The envelope bore the Willow Ridge High seal. Inside, an invitation. Ms. Brooks, it is with great honor that we invite you to return to Willow Ridge High School as a guest lecturer for our Fall STEM series. Your story has transformed our district's direction, and we believe our students would benefit greatly from your experience. We hope you'll consider leading a special lecture titled, Seeing the Unseen, the Power of Pattern Recognition in Complex Systems. Respectfully, Interim Principal Valerie Chan. She read it twice, then looked at her computer screen, her equation glowing in real time, running in the background of a test flight. And she knew.
This wasn't the end.
It was a return, but this time, on her own terms. When the flight touched down at the local airport 2 weeks later, press waited again. But this time she didn't stop for interviews. She walked past them, past the noise of curiosity and awe, straight to the same building she once entered with fear in her chest. Room 2013 had been repainted. The nameplate read, Guest Lecturer, Tiana Brooks. She stood behind the podium, eyes scanning the sea of students. Black, white, Latino, Asian. Some leaning forward, some skeptical, all watching. And she said simply, I was told once that people like me don't do math. Pause. I'm here to tell you they were wrong. The projector flickered on. The screen behind her displayed a single phrase. Let's begin. In the back of the classroom, a familiar face steps in. Leah, holding a sealed envelope addressed to Tiana from a private STEM foundation, with funding to start her own school. The Willow Ridge High auditorium had never looked like this before. Rows upon rows of seats were filled. Teachers in the front, parents along the back wall, students crammed shoulder to shoulder, some even lining the aisles. The stage had been freshly painted, the curtains drawn wide, and a large screen behind the podium displayed one name in bold lettering. Tiana Brooks, Guest Lecturer, NASA Young Thinkers Panel. Topic: Thinking Beyond the Box. They put you in. The whispers started before she even stepped on stage. Cameras were everywhere. School board officials sat rigid in the second row. Former classmates fidgeted beside their parents, unsure whether to clap too loud or just listen. Even Leah, now a senior, sat beside Principal Valerie Chan, holding a sealed envelope marked confidential, a grant proposal from a national STEM foundation. But it would wait. The lights dimmed, and then she stepped out. Tiana walked slowly, calmly, like someone finally stepping into the space they were once barred from. She wore a gray suit, simple, sharp, and her locks were tied back in a low bun. Her badge from NASA glinted under the spotlight, but it was her presence that stole the room. She stood at the podium, looked out across the crowd. Then she began. I was 15 when I first walked into this school. Her voice carried steady, intimate. Back then, I didn't think much about ceilings. I only thought about how to get the answer right. But I learned quickly that sometimes it's not about the math. Sometimes it's about whether people believe someone like you should even be in the room. Murmurs. One teacher leaned forward, elbows on knees. I was told I didn't belong in advanced calculus, that I probably got lucky, that someone like me, black, quiet girl, must have cheated. A pause. But here's the thing. The numbers didn't lie. They never have. The room fell completely silent. And when the truth finally rose to the surface, when everything came crashing down, I didn't celebrate, because I realized something worse than doubt had been planted. The idea that intelligence looks like one thing, sounds like one voice, that genius is a narrow road only some are allowed to walk. Tiana stepped away from the podium now, walking slowly across the stage. But intellect is not a color. It's not a zip code. It's not a name on a transcript. It's a fire, and some of us had to light our own match just to be seen. In the audience, several students sat up straighter. I didn't come back today to relive what happened. I came back to say this. If you're sitting here right now wondering whether you're smart enough, brave enough, or enough to take up space in rooms that weren't built for you, this is your proof. Her voice lowered, deliberate. I am the math problem they couldn't solve. A beat. And now I'm building the solution they never saw coming. Applause erupted, not polite, not forced, but thunderous. Parents stood, teachers wiped their eyes, even Principal Chan clapped from the edge of the stage. As the crowd quieted, one of the science teachers leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "She just changed lives today." And she had. After the event, a line formed down the aisle, students waiting to speak to her, get a photo, shake her hand. Most were black or Latino, but not all. A white student asked for reading recommendations. A Southeast Asian girl told her she wanted to build something like that equation that everyone said wasn't possible. One after another, they came. But Tiana's eyes eventually drifted to the front row, where a small figure still sat, unmoving. A young black girl, maybe 12 or 13, braids pulled into a neat ponytail, glasses slightly tilted, a spiral-bound notebook in her lap. She wasn't watching the stage anymore. She was scribbling. Tiana squinted slightly and stepped off the stage, walking toward her. The girl didn't look up. On the notebook were lines of handwritten equations, derivatives, limits, and something that looked like a velocity function embedded inside a recursive loop. "What you working on?" Tiana asked gently. The girl startled, nearly dropping her pen. "Oh, just something I saw in my head during your talk. It probably doesn't make sense yet. I haven't finished it." Tiana smiled softly. Math doesn't have to be finished to be beautiful. The girl blinked. Really? Really? What's your name?" "Anaya," she said, nervously. "Well, Anaya," Tiana said, crouching beside her seat. "What you're doing in that notebook. That's where it starts. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl looked up slowly, hope glowing behind her lenses. "Do you think I could ever be like you?" Tiana smiled. "No," she said. Anaya's face fell for a second, until Tiana continued. "Because I think you're gonna be something even more." The girl blinked, then smiled. Small but sure. And Tiana stood again, the auditorium now quieter, the crowd thinning. But that image stayed, a new spark, lighting in the place where hers had once nearly gone out. As Tiana turns to leave, Leah catches up, slipping the envelope into her hands. "They're offering you seed funding, not for a scholarship, for a school." It began with a single tutoring session. Once a week, every Thursday after school, Tiana met Anaya in the old math wing room, 2114 now, just one door over from where her battle had started. The room was smaller, simpler, no podium, no ego attached to its walls, just two desks, a whiteboard, and a promise. Anaya came with her backpack zipped tight, notebooks crammed with scribbles, ideas and early equations that danced between brilliance and chaos. She always walked in a little nervous, always left a little taller. Tiana never corrected her too soon. She waited, let her think. "You're not wrong," she would say. "You're just thinking ahead of where they taught you to start." Anaya would beam. "Like you did?" Tiana would just smile. "Exactly like I did." Mentoring her became less of a program, and more of a ritual, a quiet echo of the girl Tiana had once been. Only this time, she wasn't alone. There were 3 other students now, two from different schools. One who rode an hour by bus just to sit and talk vectors. It was spreading. Not because she told them they could be brilliant, but because she let them see it in themselves. Months later, the school gathered again, this time outside, beneath a newly constructed courtyard installation, near the math building. A curved glass panel, etched with dozens of student names, past and present, stood in the sun. In the center, bold silver lettering spelled, "Math is for everyone." The memorial wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. It stood exactly where Wexler once dismissed an entire generation of thinkers, and now, his name was gone. Quietly scrubbed from the school's online records, removed from the staff archives, his photo taken down from the faculty board. No announcement, just absent. No erasure of history. Just correction. Principal Valerie Chan had made it clear. We don't erase our mistakes, but we do stop glorifying them. Tiana didn't cheer when she heard. She just nodded, quietly. The silence was louder than any applause. Her acceptance to MIT came with confetti in the envelope, and a handwritten note from the chair of the mathematics department. We've been following your trajectory mathematically and metaphorically. We would be honored to have you here. Full ride, research assistantship, fast track to graduate studies. Everyone expected her to go, but Tiana hesitated. She sat with her mother on their back porch, watching the sky darken above Virginia pines. The stars were out, clear and close. You always told me to go where the stars pull me, Tiana said. Her mother looked over. So what's pulling you now? Tiana looked down at her laptop, where the nonprofit paperwork was half filled in. I want to build something first. Not for me. For all the NA still scribbling formulas. No one sees. Her mother didn't argue, because she understood something now. Brilliance isn't only what you achieve, it's what you leave behind. 2 months later, the Brooks Equation Project officially launched, a nonprofit offering mentorship, curriculum redesign, and access to advanced STEM education for marginalized students nationwide, sponsored by a coalition of Black scientists, engineers, and educators. The program began in 5 schools, including Willow Ridge. The mission was simple: redefine what brilliance looks like and where it comes from. NASA offered partnership. Google donated tablets. MIT offered summer research slots for Brooks scholars. And the National Education Equity Forum invited Tiana to keynote their next summit. But the centerpiece of it all, the symbol that anchored her journey, hung in her new office, framed, backlit, with silver ink beneath glass. Her original equation. The one Wexler called nonsense. Now labeled NASA Adaptive Trajectory Model 14. Core Variable Contribution. Brooks Drift Reduction Pattern.
There it was, no debate, no smear, just fact.
The math had spoken, and it had spoken in her name. One afternoon, Anaya stood in Tiana's office, her eyes wide as they locked on the equation behind her. You wrote that? She asked. Tiana smiled. I did. Anaya looked from the wall to the books, to the awards on the shelf, to the quiet way Tiana stood unmoved, grounded. Do you think I could ever do something like that? Tiana leaned down so they were eye to eye. I don't think, she said. I know. Anaya blinked. Because I didn't do all this just to be the first. I did it so you won't have to be. They hugged, brief but powerful. That evening, Tiana returned to her apartment, tired but full. She made tea, sat at her desk, and opened an old notebook, one she hadn't touched in a long time. The pages were faded, corners curled, equations scrawled in ink and pencil, some crossed out, others circled. The notebook that once held the key to her future now held the reminder of her origin. She turned to the back page, where a single quote had been added in her handwriting, dated the day of her hearing. She read it again, this time aloud, just to hear it in the room. They tried to silence her mind, but instead she rewrote the equation of who belongs. Outside, the stars shifted, and somewhere in a classroom she hadn't yet visited, a child looked up at a board, fingers twitching with potential, wondering whether they were allowed to be great. And now, because of her, the answer was already waiting for them. Yes, you belong. Start writing. We'll listen. We see you. If you've ever been told you don't belong just because of who you are, then you know this story isn't just hers. It's every quiet genius they tried to silence. Type yes if you believe brilliance has no color. Subscribe if you believe it's time we stop ignoring stories like this.